Our team start back, we're talking FF7, we're talking Rebirth. We're back with yet another interview, this time with Games Radar, Kitase, Hamaguchi, the same old, same old. This interview itself, I don't think necessarily has a lot of new information, but it has been making the rounds today, and I just feel like we need to talk about it. And actually, speaking of this interview not having like necessarily new information, there's people that feel like we've seen too much when it comes to Rebirth, or feel like they're getting close to like spoiler territory with how much they talk about Rebirth. And you guys watch the channel, obviously, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but as somebody who talks about nothing but Rebirth pretty much all the time, almost every day whenever we're allowed to, and we look at like literally every single interview possible when it comes to this game, I don't feel like we're even anywhere near seeing too much. I feel like we don't know really anything about the game. We know gameplay mechanics, the mini games, the stuff that we're showing at TGS, but in terms of like story elements, I don't even feel like we know that much at all. Kind of all we really know is that like Cloud and the gang are going to be doing the FF7 story, and Zack's got like the new shit, and there's ominous rift in the sky, and Zack's like timeline or story or whatever the fuck, and that's kind of it. And also, in terms of like this being a remake, for people that think that the story's not changing, right, that it's just going to be the FF7 story going forward, how could it possibly be a spoiler? How could they be getting spoiler territory? I mean, I know there's going to be new shit, new elements to the FF7 story, but you already know what's going to happen if the story's not changing, so I don't really see how that spoils anything. It's obviously not a bad thing, right? We don't want to be spoiled for like the big moments when it comes to like trailers and things like that, but that's probably going to happen at some point. We definitely have like, I'd say like maybe like 2 more trailers minimum before the game launches. And as long as we don't get like a Barrett being stabbed by Sephiroth, like I can't believe they put that in a trailer, and then like the tease of Zack at the end of one of the trailers, whereas you knew it was Zack because of like the way the bust sword was on the back or whatever of the character. Like as long as we don't get shit like that, then I don't really consider anything too much of a spoiler, right? They're just showing like story stuff if we see like dying and things like that, just things you expect to be in the Temple of the Ancients, whatever, Forgotten Capital shit. That's not a spoiler because we know that shit's coming, right? But as long as they don't give us like the big twist stuff like that, like I can't imagine, to this day, I still can't imagine how I would have reacted to Barrett being stabbed by Sephiroth in the Shinra building had we not known that was coming. Like that would have been such an interesting moment. Anyways, let's hop into it. It's perhaps a little surprised that the pair are getting a rapturous welcome. They're helming the eagerly anticipated next chapter of a planned trilogy of games, remaking what, for many players across Europe, will have been the first Final Fantasy game they ever played. It's a legacy that Kitase, who directed the original, is all too aware of. The fact that it was the very first Final Fantasy really did leave a strong impression on people, Kitase says. They've had those memories and really cherished them for over 20 years. There's a lot of expectation, and we really can't disappoint or betray those fans with those expectations. Yet with Kitase and Hamaguchi agree on the importance of keeping the tone and the feel of 1997's Final Fantasy VII intact, there was never any intention to do a straight remake of the original, suggesting recreating the original's most memorable moments would need to be done so in a slightly different way. Anyone who played Remake knows that those differences might not be so slight, though. Without spoilers, the fates of certain characters have seemingly changed already, which could conceivably shift the direction of the entire story going forwards, or at least that's what many players expect. But the recent revelation that everything is still heading towards Advent Children throws everything up in the air. Just how much can the Remake trilogy change things if everything still has to ultimately line up with a movie from 2005? We're finally going to link up with Advent Children, and that is going to be part of canon, Kitase confirms. The overall storyline, the developments, will not go wildly out in a way that will not add up to Advent Children in the end. I don't think anyone wanted that. That's not what we're looking to create here. But to make sure it doesn't become stale and people know exactly where it's going, that it doesn't just follow the original word for word, we add in extra elements which add that little bit of doubt. Getting the right balance of that is so key. Ultimately, we're not trying to change the Final Fantasy VII story into something really different. The overall balance wouldn't really allow for that anyway. Alright, so there's obviously a lot of reading, but we had to get through kind of all of that to get to the Advent Children quote from Kitase, because for a lot of people, like this was the nail in the coffin, right? Yoshinori Kitase confirms that the remake story is going to connect to Advent Children by the end, so nothing's changing, it's going to be the exact same story, etc., etc. Despite the fact that this isn't even new information. Like even in the shit that I read, like Games Radar linked to their own article from September where Nomura already confirmed this. This is in fact very old information. Specifically, Nomura had said back then, if you play right through to the end, it will link up to Advent Children, so you don't need to worry about that. But they had said that he'd said that with a bit of a smile, as in, like, it's going to connect, but, you know, things are going to be different along the way. Bringing this all up is that, like, this whole Advent Children thing doesn't even matter, because, like, every single fucking aspect of the FF7 story can be entirely different. All the way up till around the end of the trilogy, where things can be switched back to like the FF7 timeline, course-corrected sort of thing, whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying that it's going to be that different, because it's definitely not going to be, but that's just an example. Like, they could do whatever they wanted with this story, something completely brand new, and just maybe by the end it's like, okay, we need to reset the timeline to kind of fix everything, and then it could connect to Advent Children. Like, it's that simple. We've talked a few times about like Zack being in this doomed world, which seems to be the case with the ominous rift in the sky, potentially some of our other characters dead in this like other timeline or whatever the case. In the movie example that I've used is Donnie Darko, where in that movie, the main character Donnie survives the moment he was supposed to die. similar to Zack, and it dooms the universe to be destroyed unless he dies on a certain time or date or whatever to kind of fix the timeline. I think that there's a very similar thing that could be happening with Zack, and could potentially do a similar thing with Aerith, right? Because we've talked about Aerith surviving. I've seen people say, like, well, if Aerith lives, then how does it connect to having children? But nobody's talking about Aerith surviving the whole thing, the whole trilogy, right? Whenever people talk about that, they only talk about her surviving Forgotten Capital and probably dying at a later point, right? And that's where, like, I think a little bit of, like, disconnect or confusion comes from with this discussion, because nobody's that I've ever seen has said Aerith's going to survive the whole story. Like, that's not ever been said. You can certainly argue that Aerith needs to be dead to be within the planet, to, like, conjure up the live stream at the end to help, like, you know, Holy stop meteor and all that other shit. And that's very true. But the thing is, with the original FF7, Aerith successfully summons Holy, right? We see that with, like, when we get, like, the flashback of her summoning, we see the green light shining and all that other stuff. But she can die at any point after that, right? At any single other point from the fucking Forgotten Capital to the end of the game, she can die and be within the planet. It doesn't fucking have to be the Forgotten Capital. That's what people seem to not understand. It's so much like the live stream scene stuff we talk about with, like, Cloud and Tifa. People are like, it has to be there, it has to happen, it can't change. But, like, it doesn't have to be Medeal. It can be anywhere, right? Like, Cloud's mind can break and they can fall into the live stream literally fucking anywhere, and Tifa can, you know, get his mind back together. Again, I'm not saying, like, any of this is going to happen. These are just ideas. These are just theories, discussions, speculation, whatever. I just feel like people don't think enough. Like, they just don't think of, like, the possibilities of what can and could happen. We're on a bit of a tangent here, but this is by far the most talked about thing from this article over on social media and things like that. So we kind of got to talk about it a lot, get our thoughts out there. And the difference here is, like, between me and, like, other people in the community and stuff, it's like, I expect there to be change. I don't know how big, to what degree, all that other shit. I just expect there to be change. And if nothing changes, that's fine. It doesn't affect me. I'm like, I love FF7, so it's whatever, right? Whereas the people who don't expect anything to change, if things do change, they're going to be pissed off and upset and all that other stuff. And that's kind of the difference, because I'm going to be fine either way. If things change, cool. If they don't, cool, whatever. The real gripe, if, like, the story doesn't change at all when it comes to FF7, is them saying Zack's alive, right? It's not, they've been vague about it before, but at other times they're like, Zack survived. Zack survived his death moment. What does that mean for the future? How's that going to, you know, that whole thing, right? How's that going to change the story? Zack's alive this time. And if it's like, oh, he's been dead the whole time, but he didn't realize it, or whatever the fuck, like, if they do that, like, I'll be upset only because they've said he's alive. If they were more vague all the time, instead of just saying he's alive, then it wouldn't be too big of a deal, but them just saying, Zack is alive. Oh, wait, no, actually, we've been lying to you. He's dead the whole time. It's like, that'll kind of upset me a little bit. Having children isn't the only movie influencing Rebirth, though. Trilogies often face the middle chapter problem, where the second installment must build on the first, lead into the third, and somehow stand as a satisfying piece of entertainment in its own right. It's a notoriously difficult balance to strike, but one film in particular serves as almost a textbook example of how to do it right: The Empire Strikes Back. There's a lot you can learn from that film in terms of how to do a second part of a trilogy, says Kitase. You got the setup, the settings, the characters, who they are, all explained in the first part. The real role of a second part of a trilogy is to deepen that, explore it further, go into relationships between the characters and how they relate to each other a lot more, which is very much what we focused on here. Also, linking through to the third part, the climax of the trilogy, obviously you have to have the big twist, the unexpected aspects, the things that would throw people a little bit, get them motivated to want to see what happens in the end of the story. Like I say, there's a lot you can learn from that film. It's very good to bear in mind in terms of the right way of going about the second part. So it's an interesting quote for a lot of reasons. None that I can really speak on because I've never seen The Empire Strikes Back. Sorry, I'm just not a Star Wars fan. But the main talking point from this is the Maximilian dude, like, called this when he was, like, kind of talking about and theorizing what was going to happen with part 2 and where part 2 would end. And his idea and theory for it was the North Crater. Like, North Crater, Cloud's mind breaking, our group captured, kaiju stomping the planet, meteor in the sky, kind of ending on, like, the bleakest moment, right? And I believe that's how Empire Strikes Back kind of ends. But obviously that wasn't correct in terms of, like, because we're ending at Forgotten Capital. But, you know, Max used the example of Empire Strikes Back for part 2 for the remake project. And it's kind of interesting that the devs are using it as well. Explaining his own stance on the middle chapter problem, Hamaguchi says, I think the way I'm approaching this game may be slightly different to Mr. Kitase and his perceptions and ideas about the second part of a trilogy. I think unless there is that twist, that change, that step over the first game, the big trap here is that people get expectations of what the third game is going to be like. You don't want that expectation to become lower. If you don't add in those changes and ramp up everything and make it that bigger and wider experience, then people just think they know what's coming. I want to avoid that. We want people to keep wondering. That's very much how we have approached the change from Remake through to Rebirth, just making everything bigger, more expansive, deeper. I feel that's my mission as the director now, to really ensure that that's where the game goes. In terms of the change in my approach to it, I think that's why I'm very focused for the second one. That right there is why I like Hamaguchi. That's why I'm kind of a fan of Hamaguchi these days, is because he's saying that there needs to be changes. They need to kind of subvert expectations. They don't want people to kind of know what's going to happen going forward, right? When it comes to the second game, third game, things like that. They don't want people to just think that they know what's going to happen going into the third game. And I mean, if Aerith lives, we kind of know what's going to happen, right? If things aren't different by the end of Rebirth, we do know what's going to happen. So that's why I personally think things can be different. It's kind of interesting to see the Hamaguchi sort of like disagree with Kitase in this interview. I gotta agree with Hamaguchi here, and it's not just because I expect there to be changes and kind of want changes when it comes to the remake trilogy story. Like, I want there to be new stuff. I want to not know what's going to happen. And if Aerith does survive, let's say, at the end of, Rebirth, if she survives that moment, we're all going to be like, what the hell's going on? What can we even expect for the third game, right? If Aerith is alive here, now, I do think that if she does survive potentially, she will die at a later point, but still, like, that kind of cliffhanger of like, holy shit, Aerith didn't die. Like, we expected her to die. She died here in the original game. It's the most iconic video game death, right? So it's much more intriguing to talk about than, oh, Aerith dies. Okay, well, now we know what's going to happen. They've been saying a lot in interviews, kind of recently, actually. They want to put, like, doubt in players' minds where they don't know what to expect. They don't know what's going to happen. And what bigger way do you do that than ending Rebirth on Aerith living? Kind of following everything we've already read, there's, like, a big section where they talk about, like, combat and kind of the changes there and, like, synergies and things like that, and how, like, synergy builds the bonds between characters. Stuff we already know, right? Stuff you already know if you've been following the channel or just kind of in general keeping up with the information. But towards the bottom, they talk about a little bit, kind of, sort of, like the third game and combat, and specifically like Sid and Vincent. They don't give us anything juicy or nothing, but it's still probably worth reading. Players can expect the battle system to continue to evolve in the still untitled third game in the remake trilogy too. Not only will the cast expand further with the addition of Vincent and Sid Highwind, who appear in Rebirth as guest characters much as Red 13 did in Remake, Hamaguchi says, we have to work out how they fit into the overall matrix now and work as combat characters. That's something we've started scratching our heads on recently, but the creators will have to factor in the response to Rebirth itself. Talking specifics about the battle system for the third game is something that we'll be talking about quite a way into the future. A lot of that is undecided, Hamaguchi says. But the way I see my mission for the ongoing series is that I definitely want to add extra dimensions, evolve it, give it a new fresh feel, a new gameplay experience which isn't in the game. I really want to take everything to another level. I thought that part was kind of cool to read just because we're getting a little something for the third game, even if we didn't really learn anything. But in terms of like them evolving the combat, I do wonder where they're going to go beyond Rebirth with the synergy system. Like, how do you improve the combat even more? Because we're getting the same combat from Remake, but they switched some moves up and things like that, but they also added in the synergy system now. Where do you go from there? But also the gameplay perspective of, like, Vincent and Sid. Like, what are they going to do? Sid, we had a lot of Dragoons in the history of the Final Fantasy series, so there's a lot of things they could do with that. And you have, like, the kind of template of Sonon. And, I mean, Sonon uses kind of a different weapon, but they're, two-handed, like, pole, staff kind of weapons, right? So they can do whatever. They can kind of take a little bit of Sonon shit, put it on to Sid, whatever. But Vincent is by far my most anticipated character, because I don't know what they're going to do with him. From one, just, like, the fact that he can change forms when it comes to original FF7, there's a lot you could do with that could be really, really fun. But also his weapons. He uses guns, right? And you could have him kind of use like every kind of gun. He could have like, handguns, submachine guns, assault rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, all that type of shit. And they could all perform in completely different ways, right? And there could be so much cool things you could do with Vincent. So I'm very excited to see what they do with him. And this last bit is actually particularly interesting. So it says, while Hamaguchi and Kitase alike remain tight-lipped on what to expect from the remainder of the remake trilogy, there is, tragically, one important character who won't be returning, Hamaguchi's cat Musashi, who was snuck into Remake. This is only in my headcanon here, he says, but personally I like to think that he was caught up in the Sector 7 platefall with Jessie and the lot. He's probably not going to turn up. And for those that might not be aware, the cat that's on the wall outside of Jessie's house, the ones in the front that they put a lot of like emphasis on, is modeled after Hamaguchi's cat Musashi. Now, this is old information, but it resurfaced kind of recently because he very recently tweeted about it. But kind of the main takeaway from all that is like Hamaguchi seemingly confirming that Jessie's not coming back, right? He says like, my cat probably died in the Sector 7 collapse alongside Jessie and everybody, right? Like, and I know we see like Biggs survive at the end, but there's no confirmation that Biggs is surviving in the main timeline with our group from, Cloud and everybody, right? Because we see like the sparkle shit at the end of the game, right? Whenever like Zack's like sees the explosion, the little sparkle gold shit falling out of the sky, then it cuts to like the Sector 7 slums and all the people like cleaning up, and then they see the sparkle shit, and then you see it outside the orphanage, and then you see like a little sparkle thing go into like Biggs, and then he wakes up, right? But that, you read that whole like ending segment as maybe only happening in Zack's timeline, right? Because we see it first with Zack, and then it rolls to all those scenes. But also those scenes could be happening in different timelines, right? We see like Marl and all them cleaned up in Sector 7, that could be in Remake's timeline, like Cloud and everybody's timeline, and like Biggs waking up could be in Zack's timeline for all we know. We have no fucking idea. It's never made sense how Biggs was saved anyways, right? Like, it's not realistic that somebody kind of ran up the tower a bit and grabbed his body before everything happened and got him to safety. Like, that just doesn't make any sense at all. And if Jessie's potentially alive, that also makes even less sense because she was towards the very top. So it makes a little more sense that maybe this is him being injured from something else entirely, and they're just kind of making you think he survived the Sector 7 collapse. It makes a lot more sense, too, that if there is multiple timelines, that maybe Biggs is alive or survives or whatever in Zack's timeline, and Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge could be there too. And in the remake timeline, things are happening as they're supposed to. The FF7 story, those three are dead, right? That kind of gives you the best of both worlds, so to speak. And it makes even more sense too that like in Zack's like timeline, the doomed world, it's kind of like a flip of the original FF7, right? Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge are alive, but this time like Tifa and Aerith and Baron and everybody die. because they don't have Cloud with them. Because in this timeline, Zack has Cloud, right? He survived, he protected Cloud and took Cloud to Midgar, right? There's no Cloud to help them on their bombing missions and things like that. And inevitably they might die. And they might go back to that, news footage that we've seen from one of the recent trailers, right? I'm starting to lose my voice if you can't tell. We're starting to get a little raspy. We've been recording for quite a while today, and this is a relatively lengthy video. Anyways, the video is long enough. We've talked a lot about different things in this video. I'll link to the Games Radar article if you want to look at it, check it out for yourself or whatever the case. Comment on anything you want to. We're just going to wrap the video up. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, -YT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.